Hey guys, welcome to another totally awesome episode of Video Game Masters. I'm Mark Rodriguez.
I'm Johnny Rodriguez.
I am Rakiarmas.
And I'm Brian from Another Terrible Idea. Thanks for having me back on the show, guys. What are we reviewing this time?
That's a very good question, Brian. Well, since we got a new Ninja Turtle movie coming out in August that's going to, I assume, bring more people to Turtle Mania, we're going to go back in time to discuss these two awesome Turtle classic games. We're going to talk about TMNT, Turtles in Time for the SNES, and TMNT, Hyperstone Heist for the Sega Genesis.
Ooh, I love those classic Ninja Turtle games. This will be awesome.
Well, since both games are so similar, but they're also kind of different, well, we all get together, review both games, and at the end we'll give our thoughts on which one of the two is our favorite. How does that sound, everybody?
Looks like the old gang is getting together again.
Yeah, let's check it out.
After the incredible success of the 4-player TMNT arcade game, Konami released a sequel called Turtles in Time in 1991. When it came time for the home version in 1992, it was released on the SNES as the first ever 16-bit Ninja Turtle game. Since Konami already made TMNT 3 the Manhattan Project for the NES, this game was called TMNT 4.
The most popular version of this game is the SNES version. It is considered one of the best SNES beat-em-ups despite being incredibly easy. We'll be discussing this version the most and then draw comparisons to the arcade. Besides only being 2-player and not being exactly arcade perfect, the graphics and music were amazing and very close to the real thing.
You can now choose from any of the 4 turtles and have a few attacks beside the usual moves. The turtles can do flying kicks, sliding kicks, and can now whip the foot soldiers back and forth. You can also dash if you continue walking long enough. They can also grab the foot soldiers and swing them towards the TV screen.
Each turtle also has their own super special attack, but it wastes some health if you do it. Finally, the turtles are now different in terms of speed and strength, with Dong being slow and strong, Rat being fast but takes more damage, and Leo Mike being the more average.
The game still has the classic pizza that refills your energy bar, but now you have a special power bomb pizza that makes you spin out of control in a wild frenzy, taking out all the bad guys in your way.
The SNES version tosses 10 stages at you. The first one is the Big Apple 3 AM, where you fight along a long bridge and have to avoid giant Robo-Krang blasting you from the background. The boss for this stage is Baxter Stockman as a mutated fly. The second stage is Alley Cat Blues, where you fight along the streets and alleys of New York until you face the boss, Metalhead.
Stage 3 is Sewer Surfing. Unlike the arcade version, this was now turned into a bonus stage where you have to beat up all the foot and pizza monsters while collecting pizza boxes for a high score. The boss in this stage is a Rat King on a foot ski. The arcade version had you fight an onslaught of pizza monster until the stage ended.
The fourth stage is the Technodrome, and it's only in the home version. Here you face all kinds of foot soldiers, mousers, and traps. And you also fight against Toka and Rastar as mid-bosses, which are mutants that appeared in the second live-action movie, The Secret of the Ooze. Then you also face the Shredder in a unique boss battle where you have this weird behind the Shredder view, and the only way to damage him is by throwing the foot soldiers towards the screen. After this, Shredder escapes and banishes you to a time warp. In the arcade version, Shredder appears at the end of the sewer surfing stage to knock you through time.
Stage 5 starts your journey across time, Prehistoric Turtle Source. Fighting stone warriors, you're dodging dinosaurs, and the boss for this stage is probably one of the toughest in the game, but definitely a fan favorite, Slash, the evil turtle from Dimension X. The arcade version had a boss called Cement Man who was kind of based upon the glue monster who appeared in an early episode of the classic series.
Stage 6 is Skull and Crossbones as the turtles take to the open seas on a pirate ship. Here the bosses are Bebop and Rocksteady dressed in pirate gear. Surprisingly, they weren't in the arcade version, and you fought Tokar and Rastar instead with extra rain and lightning effects.
Stage 7 is Bury Myself at Wooded Knee, where you ride at Spanish Train while avoiding giant barrels. The boss in this stage is Leatherhead.
Stage 7 takes the Turtles to the future with Neon Knight Riders, another stage that was turned into a bonus round in the SNES version to show off the brand new Mode 7 graphics at the time. The boss of this stage is Krang and his android body.
Stage 9 takes you to the Starbase, where no turtles have gone before. This is Krang's spaceship with more traps as well as tons of enemies. The boss here is Krang and a flying machine that shoots bubbles at you. Defeat him to get back home.
Stage 10 is the final shell shock. It takes you back to modern day to 1992. Okay, but anyways, you gotta fight the Shredder, who becomes the Super Shredder and has these energy attacks. He can either freeze you with an ice attack, burn you with a fire attack, or he shoots these green energy orbs to turn you back into a normal turtle. Luckily, this time it's not a one-hit kill, but it still does a lot of damage. In the original arcade version though, you just fight the normal Shredder with a sword, and he fights with more hand-to-hand combat and not these weird magical energy attacks. Defeat him to save the Statue of Liberty!
The SNES version also added the ability to have the turtles either be in the brighter colors like the cartoon, or darker colors and missing their pupils like the comics. I guess. Even though in the comics they all wore red bananas anyways and didn't have different skin colors. There's also a versus mode where you and a player can fight it out in a 2 out of 3 match with any of the turtles. This property inspired TMNT tournament fighters later on.
Later on, in 2005, there was an unlockable version of Turtles in Time in the PS2 game TMNT 3 Mutant Nightmare, based upon the 2003 series. Unfortunately, all the music and voices were changed due to the producers not owning the original 80s theme. The game was also so specific and accurate to the arcade that you could only use the turtle that went along with that place they were set in the original arcade cabinet. So, if you didn't have a multiplayer adapter, you could only use Leonardo and Michelangelo in 2-player mode, since Raphael and Donatello were reserved for the 3rd and 4th player slots.
Later on in 2009, Ubisoft released a remake called Turtles in Time Reshelled for the Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network. The game had rendered graphics and the turtles could now move in all 8 directions, but the music was replaced once again due to not having the rights to the 80s cartoon theme song. The Turtles and the Shredder were now voiced by the same guys who do the Turtles and the Shredder in the 2003 cartoon. The game got several complaints, however, due to the poorly lit levels, the dark graphics, and the fact that it was a remake of the original arcade version and not the SNES version. And of course also complained because the original arcade soundtracks were all replaced and the new music wasn't that exciting. Due to Ubisoft losing the license, this game, as well as the first Turtle arcade game, was pulled offline in 2011. Which kinda sucked because Johnny and I bought the Xbox 360 back in the day, hoping to play both of these games someday. Well, now we talked about the SNES version, let's continue with the Genesis version, TMNT Hyperstone Heist.
TMNT Hyperstone Heist was released for the Sega Genesis in 1992, which looked and played very similar to Turtles in Time. This time the Shredder used the Hyperstone to shrink the city down and the turtles have to stop him. The only difference in the gameplay is that the turtles now have a dash button and you can't throw the foot soldier into screen anymore.
Hyperstone Heist has only 5 stages, but with the exception of stage 4, they're divided into several parts, so the game isn't as short as you would think. The stages are heavily based on those found in Turtles in Time, but some of them also draw references from the first Turtle arcade game. The first stage is New York City. It takes you throughout the city and the sewers where you fight out foot soldiers and pizza monsters. The boss of this stage is Leatherhead.
Stage 2 is a mysterious ghost ship. But not a pirate ship, oh no! It's a random old ship that kinda looks like a pirate ship set in modern day. Anyways, you end the stage in a non-prehistoric looking cave where you face Rocksteady. This time he's in his classic self and he fights similar to how he did in the first TMNT arcade game.
Stage 3 is Shredder's hideout, which is mostly new, but also takes a lot of cues from the Shogun stage shown in the NES version of Turtles 2, the arcade game. The boss here is Tatsu, Shredder's right-hand man from the first 2 live-action movies.
Stage 4 is the gauntlet which throws Pizza Monster at you, but also bring back Leatherhead, Rocksteady and Tatsu for the rematch. The boss here is Baxter Stockman, but back in his human form and using the same flying machine he did in the first Turtles arcade game.
The 5th stage is the final Shell Shock, which is the Technodrome, and it is basically a remix of all past Technodrome stages in other games. The mid-boss is Krang, flying around in his android body. The final boss is the Super Shredder. He fights exactly the same like he does in the SNES version, but he moves a lot faster this time. Alright guys, so now we saw both games, let's discuss which one of the two was our favorite, and I'll go first. And I gotta say, it's real close, they're both very similar, but it just has to be the SNES version of Turtles in Time, because this is the real arcade, copied for a home version. This is like the better music, the better graphics, better sound, the stages, everything just like the arcade, or at least as close as it could be for a 16-bit, console. But it was very well done. Even had extra stages with characters like the Rat King and Beat Up and Rocksteady, and of course everyone's favorite Slash. That was cool for the kids and the fans back in the day. And I gotta say that for some weird reason, I guess the original arcade version of Turtles in Time just wasn't that memorable or that popular compared to the original arcade. Lots of people agree that the SNES version is the better version of Turtles in Time. When they made Reshelled, everybody was so pissed off that they went back to redo the arcade version and not the SNES version. And some people are still confused or even surprised when they go and you play it and you see Cement Man come out instead of Slash, because they think that the real arcade version had Slash. So I'm not really sure why it wasn't as popular as the first one, but that's the thing. People just love the SNES version better. Now, as for the Genesis version, it's a pretty good game, but I gotta say, for me, it's kind of a mystery why Konami and Sega went that route with this one. Now, the Turtles were always on Nintendo systems. This was the first Turtle game made for a Sega system back then. And I don't know why they just didn't make the Genesis version of Turtles in Time. I guess they wanted to make a whole new game, but it was just easier to just cut and paste stuff from Turtles in Time, or maybe because the arcade was new at the time, it would confuse the kids as to why the Turtles in the Genesis look and fight different, because it's a, completely different game with a different graphics and gameplay style. But it's kind of weird. Now, of course, for me and Johnny, it wasn't a big deal because we owned both the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. We had both games, so, whatever, it was fun for both of us. But for someone that only had a Genesis back in the day, this is the best you could do to have like your own home version of Turtles in Time. So I don't know how that would have been if that's all you had and that's as close as you could get Turtles in Time. It's just weird. But I do gotta say, it is kind of cool. It's a different game, more turtle action. We can't have enough. And Tatsu's in it from the live action movie. It's the only game that has Tatsu in it. And it's also the only game that has Rocksteady as the boss without Bebop. That's also kind of strange. But yeah, it's just a weird thing. I don't know why they did it that way. And yeah, the graphics are a bit bigger on the Genesis, but SNES has better colors. And the Genesis has that problem with the scratchy, kind of screechy voices, and the turtles sound all scratchy and stuff. So yeah, like I said, I like the SNES version better. The Genesis is still fun. If you have both, go for it. But if you can only have one, the SNES one is the better one, and it is actually based on the arcade. So anyways, guys, that's my thoughts. You're up next, Johnny. What do you think?
That's kind of a debatable question. I like both games equally for the most part. Turtles in Time was not the original, but it was like it was a sequel from the first arcade game, so that's the game where they kind of continued with that type of beat 'em up platform that the first game had. We all know that Hyperstone Heist basically is a rehash from Turtles in Time, and it's a rehash from Turtles 2, from Turtles 3. Like, they just borrow elements from level A, B, C from each game, and they just put it all into one big mix. But in a certain way, I do like the Hyperstone Heist because of this. It's crazy seeing that going on as you're beating all the enemies up. My only little gripe I would really have with Hyperstone Heist would be two things. I don't like the voices, but you really can't do much with the Genesis back in the day. And I don't like how you can't like throw the enemies, that 3D throw that they had in the Turtles in Time. I guess either because Genesis couldn't handle that, or they just wanted to kind of be a little different from the other game. So in a certain way, that does make the gameplay a little repetitive. But for the most part, I still like the Hyperstone Heist because I wouldn't say it's refreshing. I was going to use that word, but it's a fun game to play.
As good as Hyperstone Heist really was, I still have to believe that Turtles in Time was the better game. The colors were brighter, the SNES sound chip made the music and voices sound crisper, and it had that great mechanic of being able to throw the enemies at the screen. Hyperstone Heist tries to capture some of Turtles in Time's magic, but it's not quite there. It's kind of like trying to compare VR Troopers or Big Bad Beetleborgs to the original Power Rangers. You had the right idea, but you can't quite beat the original.
I think I will choose the Hyperstone Heist because Genesis does what Nintendo don't.
And that's all the turtle power we could cram into this episode of Video Game Masters. I'm Mark Rodriguez, and I'm saying thank you all for watching.
And this is Brian from Another Terrible Idea.
And this is Rakiarmas. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Well, guys, that's a wrap for today's episode. This is Johnny Rodriguez, and see you next time. Now, hey, I know, other people can say it, but I make this look good.